Welcome to Obsessed with Design, a show about what makes designers tick. My name's Josh Miles. Today I catch up with Samuel Vázquez, a graffiti artist turned graphic designer turned musician turned fine artist turned instructor. Sam has got a really cool story, and I'm excited to have you listen along today. You can get all of today's show notes on our website at obsessedshow.com. Follow us on Twitter. We're at obsessedshow, and I'm at Josh Miles. While you're at it, head on over to iTunes to subscribe to Obsessed with Design. We'd love to have you rate the show and help others find us. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Sam Vázquez. Guys, today I am excited to welcome former creative director and graphic designer, artist, art educator, and curator, Sam Vázquez. Sam, thanks so much for being on Obsessed with Design.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be a part of the show and just to share some insights on design and art and life as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam is a guy who's been kind of in and out of Indianapolis over the years. So we had connected a few years ago, and it seems like we met through maybe your work that you did for a poster for the Hurricane Katrina fundraiser thing. Does that sound right?
It might have, we met through that, but I think we met earlier. I got in touch with you probably like late 90s. It might have been later than that, like 2000, 2001. And you said, I've seen one of your pieces that a printing rep showed me. So I think that was the first time we connected.
Oh, yeah. I totally remember that. That was while you were working with an agency here in Indy, right?
Yes.
So you're not originally from Indianapolis. You're originally from Puerto Rico, right?
Yes, San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Well, tell me about, I know that your path is kind of taking you through New York City as well. So tell us about how you went from Puerto Rico to New York and wound up in Indianapolis.
Yes. Well, we have family living in New York. I had an uncle and an aunt and cousins. And in the 70s, my parents traveled out there and visited them. And like with anything, they're like, hey, you guys should come up here and take advantage of the opportunities that New York can offer to a young family. So my dad moved up there first and started working in the city, and then brought the whole family over. And that was in 79, December 10, 1979.
Awesome.
Pretty cold. So it was the first time I experienced winter time in New York. And we arrived at JFK.
Well, tell me about your origin story as a designer and artist.
Yes. So 1979, with a lot of the new experiences in the city, one of those were checking out the graffiti art on the subway trains. So as a young kid, I was already, when I was like 4 or 5, that's when my parents first introduced me to art and finger painting and all that things that kids get involved with. So when I went to New York and saw trains, it pulled me as far as the energy, the color, the movement. It was just so vibrant. So that was my first introduction to the arts, and especially now looking back at public art, because when I look at what was done on the subway trains, it was for the public. It was and it was a moving gallery. So it was really interesting to see what was happening. Later on, I found out that there were kids as young as I was doing these things, 9 years old, doing subway paintings. Now that I'm older, I kind of have rebelled against the word graffiti, because when it first came out, it was what the media pointed to the art form to kind of demean it. We knew it as writing because you write your name. Later on, since you put time into it, you practice, you kind of create your style. I refer to it as style writing, which a lot of the earlier participants, that's how we call it. But that was my first introduction to the arts and seeing something creative coming out from the kids of New York at that time.
Well, you were kind of in the middle of New York as hip hop was kind of becoming a thing on the scene, and graffiti, I'm sure, was coming together all at the same time. When did, tell us about Brame. When did that become part of your style writing?
So, I mean, just to give you a quick history of hip hop as a culture, before the music and the dance, there was the art form. Some folks kind of put them all together. They said there's 4 elements to hip hop, which is, you got the art, you got the music, you got the dance, and you got like DJing and rapping that goes together. But those were separated. They came up separate, but since they came out from the same community, they kind of bundled those together to say this is under the hip hop culture. But hip hop was coined when I heard it most, it was probably like 1980, 79, 80. And it was really interesting just to see it was just the force of it. So at that time, when I got into writing Brame, which is Brame, it's a last name, but back then I didn't know it was a last name. Me, it was just the way the letters sounded good together. In graffiti, there's an unwritten rule that it's ideal not to have a tag name that is longer than 5 letters because you could write them fast. And you want to pronounce it like in 1 or 2, like syllables. So Brame is just as easy as, it rolls off just real smooth. I started writing Brame in 1983 when I was 12, 13 years old in junior high school. So that was kind of like my introduction to spending every day going out there to the subway yards. And also while I was riding the subway to school and from school, we will just walk from subway car to subway car and just hit it, marker, spray paint. So it was the whole culture was driven by the energy, the youthful energy. Almost this rebellion against what was going on. If you look at the city in the 70s, it was nearly bankrupt. A lot of the things were taken out of school, social services. So in school, there was hardly any art education or music education in the 70s. So those who were creative were going to find a way to do it. So the expression needed to come out somehow. So that was the way that it was manifested.
So how did you go from kind of this self-expression driven style writing, and how'd you find your way into the graphic design or advertising world from that?
Yeah, that was a really interesting story. In high school, I was, writing consumed my entire time I was there. And I have 2 quick stories. Like in junior high school, right before I went to high school, one of my teachers, English teacher, in every class I will sketch rather than paying attention and listening. And he came around my desk and he saw me sketching some letters. And he said, Sam, every time I see you, you're just sketching you have taken no notes. He said, you know what? Graffiti will take you nowhere. So to me, that was another example of like, okay, they don't value what we value. They don't see our passion. So when I got into high school, I was just doing the same thing, sketching, tagging the school. And in one of those, just walking around the school and tagging it up, my friend got busted. I was there, but I was not writing. But they took us both to the office. They suspended us for a week. When I came back, they said, you got to see your guidance counselor because I think you need some direction in life. Then tagging the walls and vandalizing the school. To the guidance counselor, they advised me to take some after school program. So I enrolled in what was called the Future Business Leaders of America, FBLA. So after school, we would go to a room, play with some computers. There were some school trips. And one of those trips was to, which the agency, Young and Rubicam in New York. Mm-hmm. So that was my first connection in visiting a place. And back then there was no computers. This was 1986. Computers were kind of coming into the field. So when they showed me the art department, it was just drafting tables and people drawing. And to me, I was like, people actually go to work to do so that's when I kind of connected the two, that what I was doing on the subways and writing, it was work because you're putting up your time, your effort, your talent. So when I went back to school, then the next week, I was like, let me enroll in one of the art classes. So I only took one art class in high school and applied to New York City College of Technology and got a degree there from in art and advertising design. So that was my introduction. Like graffiti opened the door, or style writing opened the door to graphic design as a whole.
And then, of course, I know you from your work in Indianapolis with agencies here. How did you make it from school studying graphic design to Indy? Was that a direct path, or were there kind of other stops in between?
It was a direct path because at that time, and with anything, you know, being young at that time, and your parents will say, well, I know you like graffiti. I know you like breakdancing, because that was another thing that I did. But you have to pick something that you're gonna make a living out of. And back then, a lot of the young people in graffiti art, we didn't know how to promote ourselves, as far as saying this is something that I can take to the next level and make a living from it. So when I came here to Indianapolis, and it was the same transition as Puerto Rico to New York, we have friends who were here. They say, come on out. So we visited Indianapolis for 2 summers in a row. We liked the slower pace of life. My parents were getting a little older, so they're like, okay, we know we can handle the grind of New York. So I think Indianapolis will be a great place. So the whole family unit moved, which is really interesting. I have both my parents here, my brother, his wife. I got a niece, my older sister, her husband. So it's really interesting how the whole family stayed together. Came here with a portfolio. Everything was done by hand. This is 1991. And I don't know if you remember, but here we used to have the Art Directors Club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they will meet up like once a month. And for maybe 6 months, I will bring my portfolio and show it to anybody that will give me the time. So in 91, 92, I was known as the guy with the portfolio, asking people to give me, a couple of minutes.
That's awesome.
But like with everything that was changing in design, I will, if I got an interview or talk to somebody, they say, do you know the computer? I see you don't have anything done on the computer. At that time, I probably had done like one project way back in 87 on a Mac Classic. I just laid out type. That's all I used it for. And I say, I really don't have any experience on the Mac. So they say, well, that's something that you're going to have to get into. So there's my entry to Heron School of Art. I went to Heron School of Art just to take one computer class and ended up spending 18 years going through the VC program.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of like just curveballs how life goes about. But at Heron, I was able to learn the computer and I was going through the VC program, stepping out and starting doing internships. And from 91 through 97, I worked odd jobs, going through school, doing some internships. So it took me 6 years to get my full-time job in graphic design after getting my degree from New York. So it was a lot of learning to do, and met some really great people that were working in design here and still working in design. So
you've worked with some pretty awesome clients here in Indianapolis, between what was originally Conseco Fieldhouse, which is now Bankers Life, where the Pacers play, and the IU School of Business and University of Indianapolis and the zoo. And so tell us a little bit about the kinds of things, once you eventually did land that agency job, what were the types of things that you worked on? Because I know that agency was very diverse in the types of projects they touched.
Yeah. And that one agency that I worked through, those projects, I met the owner. I did a poster who knew the computer then for Fiesta Indianapolis. Being from Puerto Rico, they're like, oh, that would be an interesting take on it. So that poster had some of the Puerto Rican flavor and some of the identifying items like a coquille and a baba, which is a hat that you wear in Puerto Rico. And through that friend, I met the owner of the studio. I'll mention them. They're really good friends, RLR Associates. And this was 93 when I met him. So he was the first one who gave me, he met me. He said, okay, I'm going to I didn't have a car at the time. He said, I'll pick you up. We'll go to lunch. Then I'll bring you to the studio. So to me, that was a really interesting way of how he was giving back and reaching out. So from 93 to 96, I was working on and off summers with him. I helped him move his studio from his house to downtown. So it was a really good, like, I saw it as a mentor and, in a student relationship. Then the time that Conseco project came through was really interesting. I was working at a warehouse, music distributor, and he gives me a call and he said, I just got a call from the folks, the Simons and the Pacers and everybody involved in it, because that project, there's so many people behind it. And they say they're working on the arena. They're you've heard that on the news. And he said, I'm going to make a presentation to them, but it's on a Monday. Can you come in this weekend and put a book together? So I spent the weekend just like putting a presentation book, which I still have. It's really interesting. The cover was chipboard, because if you those who know Conseco, now Bankers Life, is retro. That was the one word they say is, we want to take people back in time, and so by the time the arena opens, it has history in itself. So I had to do some fast research and put a book together. And he had his presentation. He said, yeah, they selected me. He said, would you like to come in full time? So to me, it was almost like a rehearsal on a weekend to get a job on a Monday. And it was really interesting how that whole thing happened without me thinking that, okay, I'm here on a Friday working at a warehouse, and by Monday, I have a full-time job at an agency working for one of the hottest clients at that time here in the city, with being such a high-profile project. So it's really interesting how things can happen. And those are experiences that I passed to my students when I started teaching later on at Heron School of Art. So, but it was an interesting time. And I spent there at RLR a year. Then I wanted to continue learning the computer. I knew the basics, but it was like, okay, we're getting some really interesting projects, and I wanted to learn how to do more Illustrator and Photoshop. But I was moving quickly to being more of a senior designer and art director. And I said, hold on. This is coming too fast. I want to be able to get my feet level on the ground and be able to know the computer. Because I was always thinking ahead of time. I said, what if I find myself out on my own? Would I be able to produce the work that I, might come down from clients? So I left RLR for a year and a half, worked at a firm I did all production, which, again, it was one of those things that to some of my friends, it didn't make sense. They're like, hold on, you're kind of taking a step back. And I was like, no, hold on. I want to learn as much as possible. I just want to go in and do drop shadows and do outlines and layouts and everything. After that 1 year and a half, RLR saw what I was working on. And it's like, wow, you really, I can see what you're doing. They said, we want you back. So I went back for a second time. And that's when I started working with Grand Prix when they first came in 2001. So I worked on that project for 2-3 years. And that was almost like another Conseco. There were so many moving parts. And I'm sure when you design, when there's a committee, there's a lot of people that come in, and there's that part of design that is great, but you do a lot of compromise. You understand that it's not what you want to do. There's a lot of people in stake. But it was an interesting time for me, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, as your friends kind of implied, not necessarily how you draw the arc of your career if you probably were going to do it over. But it's really cool that you knew enough once you dug in kind of in those art director roles of like, hey, I need to go learn the basics some more. And it's really cool that you're able to kind of take a step and go learn really, in depth, and then come back and, open yourself up to another fantastic client like the Grand Prix.
And I think it was one of those, like, my first day at the job when I worked at RLR, it was just him and myself. So I was his first full-time employee. We're on 101 West Ohio on the 15th floor looking down towards the Arts Garden. So it was like my first day at the job, because so many projects were coming in. Rodney, which is the owner of RLR, he went overseas. He said, I need to just, recharge my batteries, then come back and dive into it. He's been building the studio for, at that time, it had been almost 10 years just by himself. So I understood that my first day at the job was like, I opened the studio. I was answering phone, I was handling clients. So for like a week, I was the owner of the studio, but it was my first full-time job. So I learned a lot, but it was like, it's coming fast. Let me just kind of learn all the aspects of it, even the business side of it, which is something I later on learned, some of the business aspects of design.
Well, fast forward a little bit. I feel like one of the ways that I feel like I've kept somewhat in touch or aware of what you were up to was you started sending out emails to your network, just kind of updating people on what you were doing and all the things that you had touched, and kind of reminiscing about, being in New York in the 70s and the 80s. And part of me thinks that you are the real life, most interesting man in the world from those emails, because there were so many cool things that you had touched. And here's me with this famous person, or here's me working on this music, or here's me DJing. So tell us a little bit about, what made you think to do those emails, and just kind of how that directed your path?
So with that reference, should I apply for the Dos Equis?
Yeah, right.
Okay, that sounds good. That'll be a nice gig. But I think once, like when I worked on Grand Prix, that was like the last large project that I worked on through RLR. I was basically burned out. So it was, for me, it was probably like 4 or 5 years where it's just going. And it was at that point, I was like, I'm getting further away from some of the things that I enjoy. Because to build anything that will have lasting impact, you're going to have to dedicate a lot of time. And I understood that. But for me, I kind of sat back and started thinking as far as where do I want to go? And also at that time, which is 2001, my graffiti mentor, A1, Anthony Clark, passed away. He was living in Paris at that time. So to me, I was like, wow, here's a young guy, 37 years old, and he passed away. And it's like, oh, wow, like it hit me. I said, that's so young, and I was just, I was at that time, I was 31. So I was like, okay, I have to make a change, because it was not healthy. I was not going a healthy way. I didn't have a balance between life and work. It was just all work. So I started kind of reaching back to that time where for me, art or design was real fun. So I went, started connecting with friends in New York, and find out a few of them were still, they're like, oh yeah, the new thing is street art. Now we're street artists, and they paying us to do this. And we're traveling the country, and we got, fans, and we're doing books and everything. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Even though that was not a reason I got into it, to me, it was like going back to that time where you can just sit with your buddies and just talk about what you did on that day. Like, oh, where you hit a train, or where did you do a rooftop? And we just sit down and talk. So I started getting back slowly into not doing graffiti art, because I think I understood that I was at a different phase in life. Graffiti art is a young person's sport. You need to have a lot of stamina to be, going into spots that are, I won't be able to climb up those spots. I'm like, I'm too old for that. I have other priorities in life. But understanding the history and what we did, it came back from that sense of, once I started going out to some of the festivals, people are saying, yeah, I know what crew you're from. And I've seen the work of this person. So it became more of like, I've been looked at from the historical perspective, as far as being one of tens of thousands of kids who were doing that in the city, to now people wanting to know how it was, what was going on, we know about hip hop nowadays. It's $1 billion industry. And you guys were there when it was all still very raw. And that's where I'm at. I like the rawness of it. I like that immediate energy and the release of it and how it is. So I started experimenting with a lot of stuff. And at one point I had a website. It was called Opium Lab. And a lot of friends were like, whoa, dude, what's going on? Opium, what? Why are you using that word? But for me, it was just a way to experiment. So that's when I started just getting into digital music, combining both design and art. So a lot of the stuff that I did first was using photography. I still do photography and use it in my artwork. But I was trying to like bridge the gap. I was like, can I be a designer and an artist at the same time and still have that balance of, because I enjoy, like, when I got into design, I was so obsessed with it. I mean, I was just like, people are saying, even a hair, and they're like, man, you're always reading the books. And I said, that's how I'm learning, seeing what everybody else is doing. And I want to see what, in the West Coast, how they lay out type. I want to see, I know New York is mainly real bold and colors. And I mean, because you have only a few seconds to get somebody's attention. And I even had to understand how it was done here in Indianapolis. Because they're like, dude, you're scaring people with that big old 720 point type. So I think that it was that's when I saw that design was more than what people think. You have to know the community you're speaking to. It has to have a direct message to the people there and connect with it. So to me, I was like, okay. And even with art, I was like, how can I combine the both? And that's when I started getting more into art and got in a show at Dean Johnson Gallery in 2002. It was called Amor. And it was in reference to Robert Indiana, The Love. We switched it in Spanish to Amor. So it was a really good introduction to the gallery scene. And then from there, I saw the possibilities of doing more art and pushing it in a different direction that would be more direct to my experience.
That's cool. I love also, of course, that you said you were completely obsessed with design when you were in school. So thanks for the subtle nod there. What do you think you're most obsessed with today?
More obsessed with today. One thing that I've done a little bit, I haven't done a lot of it, but I like culture. So I'm obsessed with culture. Last year, I was able to go down to Jamaica for a week. And it was just like a homecoming being down in the Caribbean, because I had not been down in the Caribbean for like 34 years, maybe at that time. So I was like, okay, I got to use my passport a little more. So I like culture, different foods, different sounds, just looking at different scenery. So I think that for me now is more of my balance in life, just seeing how other people live and their experience of life in other places. Design is still there. I don't do a lot of projects, but my obsession now with design is from the spectator point of view, where I go to a store and I look at a book and I'm like, wow, look how they laid that type. So I'm looking at it. I understand how it's created, but having that separation, I can appreciate it more as a consumer of design. And so I collect books. I even have one here, which I just noticed. It's right on my reach. We were cleaning my mother-in-law's house, and I found that she had this book. Look at this.
That's awesome.
And they were going to throw it away, and I said, no.
Oh, how cool. Well, tell everybody, since radio is not the most visual medium, tell everybody what we're looking at here.
It's a book. It's Type and Typography, the Designer's Type Book. And it was by Ben Rosen. So this is kind of like before computers. You can look at different typefaces and type sizes. So I said, don't throw this book away. So I'm going to do some actual artwork, rip every page and react to the typography that's there and create new artworks. So that's one thing that I do now. And a lot of my paintings still have hidden type. and stories that I write onto them. So type is still part of my art and what I do today.
Very nice. So obviously with your work today, you're selling, as opposed to getting paid by the hour to design graphic design, you're getting paid by patrons or people who buy your artwork. So how is that different? Are you typically creating work and then, in the hopes of selling a piece, or do you typically have somebody come to you and say, hey, I want something with really bright colors or something that's really muted, and can you make something unique for me?
I don't do commissions in the sense of like, okay, I have a color in mind or size in mind. I create just, because I want to create. And I also don't paint to sell a painting. I know when I mentioned this to my wife, she was a little puzzled. Sell a paint? I say, no, I paint it. If somebody wants to buy it, that's good. It has a price once I finish it, but that's not the point, because I don't want to be influenced by, well, maybe a certain community likes these colors, or it goes well here or there, or, like New York like large paintings, here we're more mid-size. So I just create, and every day I do something. I even have little sketchbooks where I just do pencil drawings and just create. And lately I've been doing more shows, but I'm taking longer time between the shows because I want to be able to create a body of work. And once it's done, then present it rather than saying, I have a show, now I have 2 weeks to create. So I'm learning more of a balance of creation and how to exhibit the work. One thing that I do is I share about the history of style writing and hip hop culture, more from the youth perspective and the energy that came out. So those are things that I do as an artist to supplement some of the income. So I've done talks at Clues Hall. I did an introduction of Style Wars, which is a graffiti documentary at the IMA, Indianapolis Museum of Art. I spoke at a school in Ohio. So those are things that I get involved in doing so. But this coming year, I'm going to have a lot more exhibitions as far as some solo shows and opportunities that have come my way. So, yeah.
Cool. And I've had the chance to watch some of those talks. I know there's video links available, so we'll be sure and share those on the show notes for your podcast link.
Definitely.
I think I read in one of those stories about you that you said you start your day at 12:30 a.m. Is that right? What does a normal day look like for you?
It was, and it varies. During the time that they interviewed me, that was the time I was getting up, and I just wanted to see, like, okay, if I get up at a certain time, what will be the result of what I'll do? So I will be up at that time, and I just kind of say I want to welcome the day when the day is officially here, which is at 12:00.1. So that was my way of saying, okay, here's a brand new day. What, how do I approach it? I had the opportunity to do so because my wife at the time, her job at the time was night shift. So I was able to, okay, so there was that opportunity, and I said, now I can do it. So I think that also led to be able to experience it from that way. And I'm more of an early morning person. I'm usually up between 4:30, 5:30 in most days. That doesn't mean I get out of bed at that time, but I open my eyes. But, I'm an early morning person, and like working those hours and getting out before the day goes and everybody's out there on the road. So, yeah.
So where do you find the most inspiration for your artwork today?
I think for me, it's more like memory, out of memory, what I remember growing up, but then also where I'm at in the present time. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like I'm not completely retro. I remember at one point I was just so into what happened that friends were like, dude, you're living in the past. And I said, well, I might share about the past, but I live in the present day. So I know what's going on and what's happening. And one of those apparent manifestations is my art is not strictly what was done in the subway trains back in the city. And some people even say, like, where's the graffiti art? Because they've in some shows, they built me as a graffiti artist. Mm-hmm. And I say, no. I'm a visual artist with my work rooted in graffiti art. So I think that, I still use spray paint, but I treat it more as a brush. Graffiti art is very technical, even though it looks abstract. You have to practice the letter over and over and over to get a clean line. To me, I can care less about clean line. I just throw the paint, move the can. If it drips, that's fine. That's part of the rawness of it. So that's where I take inspiration from the past and from where it is now. There's also some artists that I admire a lot, and I see their work. And one of them being Stefan Sackmeister. And I know we were in the same event where you introduced him at the IMA. And that was really cool having him here in the city. But when I first met him, it was interesting because one thing that he had mentioned, he said he didn't want anybody else coming into his studio that was just kind of like him. At first, I didn't understand it. I felt like, wow, I would love to work with you. But I think that he recognized, like, dude, you're doing stuff that you kind of think similar like me, but, I understand not everybody's the same in how you express yourself and the application that you use to express yourself. So, but just looking at his work from a graphic designer, going like, wow, that's the kind of work, because to me, it looks so free. And that's the one thing about graphic design that I wanted to get to that point. But I knew that what I wanted to express, that was not the platform for it. That what I wanted to express comes from me as a person and not have, a client. I mean, I could be like a really great graphic designer, and I've done it and I've enjoyed it. But the older I was getting, I said, let me just get more personal. And I think there was other things in life that I wanted to experience, like getting married and doing other things in life. But Sackmeister is one inspiration. Mike Joyce, Stereotype Design. He's a really good friend. And every time I'm in New York, he's like, dude, let me know so we can go someplace and eat, via burger joint. There was a project that I've initiated with some of his work for the city. Right now, don't know where that may lead. There's some changes that's happened at the place it was going to be shown. But he's one person that I admire. Also musicians, especially like digital musicians. There's this one musician, he's from Mexico. He's now in Spain. He's Murkoff, Murcof. He does some really beautiful, like tempo digital music. And he has studied like Russian classical music to create this digital. And it's just like ambient music, tones and textures. And I'm like, wow. And even the fact that he took the name Murkoff, and he when you look at him now, he has that Russian, like persona. And it's really interesting, but he's one of the earlier digital musicians. And then Trenton Moller is another one, Anders, that I looked up to. And I've contacted some of these folks, and like Trenton Moller, he even contacted me back. And that's one thing that I've learned. Don't be afraid to contact people and say, hey, I'm inspired by your work. I would like to collaborate. Here's something that I've done. And that's something that I learned from older artists that I've met and designers. Having the opportunity of meeting Rick Valicenti when I worked on the 25 project. And just to see how humble, he just approached me and, hey, thanks for the invitation to participate. And I was like, wow, it's so great to see that they're open. And I realized, I said, that's a key in success, being open and sharing and not saying like, there's a separation. I'm up here and you're down there. The same thing I saw with Sackmeister and others, that I said, okay, that I understand it. It's just being human and sharing and not being afraid to share and knowing that other people are looking at what you're doing and they might be interested in it. So I take inspirations from a lot of people.
That's awesome. I think it's one of those things that you realize, as you mature in your design career. Some of us figure this out sooner than later, but like all these other, quote unquote famous designers they're just people. So like you can still talk to them and have a drink with them and go meet them for dinner and talk to them about how they think. And it's not like it's a, politician or a rock star or somebody that's like untouchable.
And I've seen it happen with other, even designers here in town. They say, because there was another project that I worked on with Jonathan McLaughlin and E Vázquez.
Mm-hmm.
It was the In an Expression of the Inexpressible. And we contacted a lot of artists who we had admired for so long. And to Jonathan, he mainly focused in Europe. So he was the one who, who got like even in New York, Carson Wilker or Jokeland out of Norway, Jean Julien, the artist who did the Paris, Pray for Paris.
Mm-hmm.
He was in our show here at Dean Johnson Gallery. So it was really interesting for him, for Jonathan as a younger artist, to say like, wow, I can reach these folks. And then he was in an experience where somebody else asked him, how did you get? And he said, I just contacted them. And that person contacted a designer they've admired for so long, and were able to go to Europe and visit their studio and talk with them. So I think it's part of understanding that we are all humans. One thing, as far as the music, that back in must have been like 2000, between 2005 2007, I used to just go to all these underground blogs for music. There was a blog where there was a well-known musician. I'm not going to mention the name. She don't need more promotion. But, she has 11 Grammys. So, I mean, she don't need my little plug. But it was a good place because we were connecting with her and her team. And we're just sharing ideas back and forth. And being somebody that likes to see things different and from a more abstractly way, I was sharing stuff like, what if you take the bass and make it do what the guitar does? So the bass will have all the, how it fluctuates in notes and just runs and goes up and down. And she put it in a song, and it was in her album. And she shared that song with Prince, and Prince said, "This is so cool. How the heck?" So to me, when that experience, I was like, that's really cool. Prince liked something that was influenced by something, I'm sure, the stuff that I've heard. And I was just able to share it in this open platform with an artist who is far away in another city. So I think that those are things that when I look at this time we're living in, and it's so great because we can share just so openly and not have that separation of like, oh, here's a PR person, here's this other person, and I cannot talk to you face to face. So I really enjoyed that platform.
Cool. I feel like you've dropped a lot of great advice on us already on this call, but tell me about, is there like a best piece of advice or favorite piece of advice that you pass along to your students, or a favorite piece of advice that you feel like you've received that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I know we haven't talked about my teaching at Heron School of Art, but that came about one teacher who I had, Paula Differing, really great mentor and teacher. When I was a student, she said, "Sam, you're going to teach." And I was like, yeah, because I wanted to get out. And 15 years later, I ended up going back and teaching there. But one thing, I teach very loose. Like, even though I have a syllabus, I teach more by inspiration. One thing I do say to my students is, the one advice is just simply be. Be who you are. Just be. We don't have to try to create something. Just be, because we're all unique and we have a different perspective. Even in design, I see the different perspectives. That's why the diverse in how people lay type, use of color, photography, what influenced them. So those are the one things that I tell them. Speak from who you are, speak the truth from who you are, and that will, you have it figured out. And that would be my advice for my students or anyone out there listening, young person, designer.
Nice. Well, you're welcome to answer this question as an artist or designer or however, or maybe just how you be, but you can, what do you think your proudest moment has been so far as a designer or artist?
As a designer, I think it's when somebody walks into a place, for example, like one of the lasting projects that are here, especially in town, is now Banker's Life Fieldhouse. Just when a person walks into the space and just interact with the space, and it's almost like Disneyland. They've seen it for the first time, even though it was created almost 18 years ago. To people, it's fresh. So to be able to see how people interact without being so conscious that somebody was behind the design. And I think that's where, when I see great design, it's not when you say like, oh, look how somebody did this or that. They just interact with the space, whether it's, oh, there's the concession stand, so the signage tapes on there, or, if the function is to move people around a building and it does it well, then I'm proud of that. So I think Banker's Life is one of those projects I'm very proud of, in the fact that it does, it works, and it kind of for a moment there, it was like the best basketball arena in the nation. So it was really interesting to see that it set a standard on how it was not just a place where you watch a basketball game. It was a place where you experienced the history of basketball, and especially Indiana basketball. So it was like a museum in a sense, and that's how some people view it.
Yeah, and if for anybody who's listening ever has a chance to go see a game or an event at now Banker's Life, it's definitely a cool experience, and I love how the context of even the signage was thought about from a retro standpoint. So many things were spotlit as opposed to backlit, and there's not a lot of digital elements. It's really more how you might have experienced a field house back in the 40s or 60s or somewhere in that time frame, pre all of these, modern day flashy strobe lights.
And even that, there's a really interesting story about the backlit, because in some of the earlier meetings, owners and other people are like, okay, we got to change advertising so often. So, and now backlit is the way to go. It says, that's not retro. Back then they didn't have that technology. We at RLR were fortunate enough that we found out a sign painting company that was still in operations in Indy. And we reached out to them, and they were so grateful. They were like, wow, this is so great. We get to do the work we want to do. So it not only created that retro look, but it was able to employ others whose passion is to paint signs and advertisements on brick wall. So, and just to create the whole criteria for future advertisers to come in and know what visual elements play into the whole story of the arena and the whole story of, the field house and Indiana basketball. It's a really awesome project.
Very cool. Well, speaking of stories, yours has taken some twists and turns so far in your career. Where do you think you're going to be 10 years from now? What do you think you'll be doing?
10 years from now, there's some things that are coming down the line that right now I'm not in liberty to share, because it's one of those things that I've learned. It's like, don't share before, don't get the carriage before the horse. So, I mean, there's things that are coming up that will continue just drawing me as an artist. I see myself as a global perspective, and the beauty of being here in Indianapolis is so central, and we have a very strong international community that, slowly is being showcased more. The United States is international. So when I don't see like Caribbean and then international is Europe. The whole world is international. So there's some opportunities that are coming up that it will continue growing me as an artist. One thing that I can tell you in the next year or so, my paintings are getting larger. So I'll have the opportunity to do paintings for upcoming shows that are 8 feet by 8 feet and larger. So those are things that I want to continue growing as an artist and looking at my work from different perspectives. And right now, there's a voice within my work that is being identified, and I see it, but I don't want to be trapped by what's currently happening. I want to continue growing that voice. So that's where I see it.
Very cool. Well, that's an awesome tease for us to look out for in the next year and 10 years for all those exciting things that you're not ready to share with us just yet. But as we're wrapping up here, tell us about where some of your fans can find you online, or what's the best place to track you down to keep up with what you're up to.
Very simple. My website, SamuelEVázquez.com. Vázquez is spelled Vazquez. And also on Instagram as Samuel E Vázquez. And one little project that it's in the works, and I'll release it here in July, is I'm working on a extended digital electronic mix. I arrange all the music and all the sounds, and in celebration of the games down in Brazil, I will secretly filter that sound down. So if you're down in Brazil in the clubs, you might hear some of the music that I put together, but it'll be secretly done.
Nice.
Through my moniker. So those who follow some of my emails know my moniker. And it's out there. You can Google it and you'll hopefully find it. But that's one thing that I like to do. Just share. It's free for people to download and just enjoy.
Very cool. Well, Sam, it's been a pleasure catching up with you, and hope to bump into you sometime soon down here in Indianapolis.
Definitely. We have to do coffee or tea or something. I'm more of a coffee person. I know you are too. So.
Oh, you know it. Awesome. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being obsessed with design. All right, guys, that's show number 15 officially in the books. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation with Sam Vázquez. You can get all of today's show notes on our website at obsessedshow.com. Follow us on Twitter. We're at obsessedshow, and I'm at Josh Miles. While you're at it, head on over to iTunes to subscribe to Obsessed with Design. We'd love to have you rate the show and help others find us. Obsessed with Design is a production from the design-obsessed folks at Miles Herndon, a branding agency located 13 floors above Monument Circle in downtown Indianapolis. For more information on our agency, visit milesherndon.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.